During my sister's wedding, my dad said to my grandpa, "You don't deserve to be here." Grandpa just kept quiet. Then the most respected guest entered the hall, approached Grandpa and said, "Glad to see you, partner." My dad turned pale. I'll never forget the moment my world split in two. The orchestra was playing softly, guests smiling as my sister floated down the aisle. Everything looked perfect until Grandpa Henry walked into the reception hall. My father's smile vanished like a switch had been flipped. He stepped forward, voice cold enough to freeze the room. "You don't deserve to be here." The laughter died. Glasses stopped midair. Grandpa stood there clutching a small gift box, his old suit trembling in the light. He didn't argue, just lowered his head as whispers spread like wildfire. I wanted to scream to defend him, but my voice was gone. Then the massive oak doors swung open. A man everyone in Charleston respected, a billionaire, the guest of honor, walked straight past my father and hugged Grandpa. "Glad to see you, partner." And in that instant, my father's pride shattered before everyone's eyes. Growing up, I used to believe my family was unbreakable. My dad, David Parker, was the kind of man people respected or feared. He built a real estate business from scratch and never stopped reminding us that appearances matter. My mom followed his lead, quiet and polished, while my older sister Emily inherited his charm, his ambition, and unfortunately his pride. Me, I was the observer, the one who stayed quiet at dinners when Dad complained about Grandpa Henry. "Your grandfather could have been something if he hadn't wasted his life fixing old houses." Dad would sneer, swirling his whiskey. "He clings to the past because he never had the guts to move forward." Mom never contradicted him. Emily laughed along, but I always felt a knot twist in my stomach. Grandpa wasn't rich, but he was kind, humble, in a way that made people trust him instantly. When I visited him on weekends, he'd hand me lemonade, show me photos of Grandma, and tell stories about helping veterans rebuild homes. "Your father chases towers of glass," Grandpa used to say, smiling sadly. "But the real foundations worth building are people." When Emily got engaged, Dad treated the wedding like a corporate merger. The guest list was filled with CEOs, politicians, socialites, people who could elevate our family image. Every flower, every dish, every song had to scream status. One evening, as we reviewed the seating chart, I noticed Grandpa's name missing. "Where's Grandpa's seat?" I asked. Dad didn't even look up from his laptop. "He's not coming." "What? Why not?" "Because this isn't a backyard barbecue." "Sophia, he'll stick out like a sore thumb." I felt anger rising. "He's family." "He's your family," Dad snapped. "Not mine." The words hit harder than I expected. That night, I drove to Grandpa's small house on the outskirts of Charleston. The porch light flickered, and he greeted me with that same gentle smile. "You look troubled, sweetheart." I told him everything about how Dad thought he'd embarrass us. He just chuckled softly like he'd heard it all before. "Your father's been chasing shadows for years," he said. "Let him run. I'm not angry. I just hope one day he remembers who taught him to stand." I begged him to come anyway. He hesitated, then nodded. "If you want me there, I'll come for you." When I hugged him goodbye, I felt his hands tremble, but not from weakness. It was something deeper, something quiet and powerful, like he knew this wedding would change everything. I didn't realize then that I was inviting a storm into that ballroom, one that would tear open every secret my family had tried so hard to hide. The morning of Emily's wedding felt unreal, like everything was dipped in gold. The hotel buzzed with stylists, florists, and photographers. Dad barked orders into his phone while Mom adjusted her pearl necklace for the 100th time. Every corner smelled of money and perfection. But when Grandpa Henry stepped out of the cab, everything stopped. I saw him through the glass doors, his gray hair neatly combed, his old navy blue suit pressed, shoes polished to a dull shine. He carried a small gift box wrapped in gold paper, careful like it was something sacred. "Grandpa's here," I whispered to Mom. Her smile faltered. "Oh dear." Dad turned, his jaw tightening instantly. "He came. I invited him," I said softly. "Sophia," he hissed. "This wedding is full of Charleston's elite people who know how to dress for an event like this. Heck embarrasses us." Before I could reply, Grandpa entered the lobby. His eyes found mine first, and he smiled with that familiar warmth that made me feel 5 years old again. "You look beautiful, Sophia." He extended his hand toward Dad. "David." Dad didn't shake it. Instead, he scanned Grandpa from head to toe, his expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Dad, I told you this wasn't necessary. I just came to wish Emily well," Grandpa said quietly. "Families should be together on a day like this. You should have stayed home," Dad snapped. "This isn't your world anymore." My stomach twisted. Mom touched Dad's arm, whispering, "David, please," but he pulled away. "Don't start, Linda. He had his chance to be part of this family years ago." The wedding planner rushed by, pretending not to hear, but the tension was thick enough to stop her in her tracks. When the ceremony began, I noticed Grandpa sitting in the back row alone. He clapped when Emily walked down the aisle, though she never glanced his way. Later at the reception, the orchestra played soft jazz, champagne glasses clinked, and the chandeliers shimmered like stars. Grandpa waited patiently in line to greet the newlyweds, still clutching the small gift box. When his turn came, he smiled. "Emily, you look radiant. I'm so proud of you." Emily hesitated, glancing nervously at Dad. That's when Dad stepped forward, voice booming across the marble floor. "You don't deserve to be here." The music stopped mid-note. Guests froze, forks suspended in midair. A silence heavier than shame filled the room. Grandpa's face didn't change, only his eyes dimmed slightly, as if a quiet light inside had flickered. He bowed his head and whispered, "I understand." He turned slowly toward the exit, the gold box still in his trembling hands. I wanted to follow him, but just as he reached the door, the massive oak doors swung open, and the moment that followed would silence my father forever. For a few seconds, no one breathed. The echo of my father's voice, "You don't deserve to be here," still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Glasses were half raised, whispers like faint static spreading from table to table. I could feel every eye on Grandpa as he stood frozen near the door. The soft music now replaced by the sound of his uneven breath. Emily's face went pale. The photographer lowered his camera. Even the waiter stopped moving. Dad stood tall, chest puffed out as if he'd just defended his honor, not shattered someone else's. "Dad, please," I whispered. "Stop." He didn't even look at me. "He shouldn't have come," he said flatly. "He's not part of this anymore." Grandpa straightened his back, his shoulders shaking slightly. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I only wanted to see my granddaughter happy." He turned toward the door. That's when I noticed the small gold box slip from his grasp. It hit the floor softly, a dull thud that somehow sounded louder than the orchestra ever had. I rushed to pick it up, but he shook his head. "Leave it, Sophia," he murmured. "It's just a gift, not worth more trouble." Something inside me cracked. "You shouldn't let him speak to you like that." He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Let him speak. Sometimes silence says more than words." As he reached for the exit, the grand oak doors swung open, light spilling into the ballroom. A man in a navy suit entered, his presence commanding instant respect. The murmurs started before anyone could even see his face clearly. "Isn't that Michael Donovan, the Donovan Group CEO? What's he doing here?" My father froze. Donovan was the most powerful philanthropist in Charleston, the kind of man Dad had spent years trying to impress. The crowd parted as Mr. Donovan strode across the marble floor, scanning the guests. Then his eyes landed on Grandpa. His entire expression softened. "Henry," he quickened his pace, ignoring my father's outstretched hand. "Glad to see you, partner," he said warmly, grasping Grandpa's hand with both of his. The room gasped. My father's face went white. "Partner," he stammered. Mr. Donovan smiled broadly. "Of course Henry and I go way back." Cameras flashed. Murmurs swelled again. I looked at Grandpa, still stunned, still quiet. But this time there was a spark in his eyes. He had come to give his granddaughter a gift. Instead, fate had just handed him something far greater. The truth. Mr. Donovan's words cut through the air like thunder. "Glad to see you, partner." The entire ballroom froze. For a second I thought I'd misheard. But when Mr. Donovan clasped Grandpa's hand and laughed warmly, I knew this wasn't a polite greeting. It was real. Dad blinked rapidly, his lips twitching like he was trying to process what he just heard. "Partner," he repeated, voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Donovan smiled easily. "Yes, Henry and I co-founded the Charleston Veterans Restoration Fund last year. He's the heart of it, really. I handle the money. He handles the vision." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests began whispering. Cameras lifted discreetly. He's a partner with Michael Donovan. I thought he was just a retired handyman. My father's face was drained of color. The same man who'd humiliated Grandpa seconds ago now looked like he was standing in quicksand. Donovan turned to him with an easy grin. You must be David Parker, right? I've heard a lot about you from your father. You should be proud. He's a remarkable man. Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Meanwhile, Grandpa's steady calm just chuckled softly. Michael, I told you not to make a fuss, he said, his voice humble as ever. This night belongs to my granddaughter. Donovan waved his hand dismissively. A man like you deserves recognition, Henry. You've built more homes for veterans than most organizations combined. And now, with the expansion grant, your late wife's name will live on in every brick. The room erupted in applause. Mom wiped away tears. Emily stood frozen in her wedding gown, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Even she looked ashamed. I glanced at Dad, his pride collapsing in real time. His jaw worked furiously, searching for control, but he couldn't find any words to rebuild what he'd just destroyed. Grandpa bowed his head modestly. I didn't do it for attention, he said softly. I just wanted to build something that lasts longer than pride. Donovan grinned and patted him on the back. And that's why you're the kind of man I trust with everything. The applause swelled louder this time, sincere and thunderous. Guests who'd looked away minutes ago were now stepping forward to shake Grandpa's hand to congratulate him. I turned to my father. He stood stiff, motionless, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly looking too tight, too small. In his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance. It was fear. Because in that single moment, the entire world saw the truth. The man he tried to bury beneath shame was the very man everyone now admired. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of what Grandpa had planned. After the applause faded and the music slowly resumed, the air in the ballroom felt different, lighter for everyone except my father. He stood in the corner, avoiding every eye that turned his way. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Grandpa, however, stayed calm as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When the photographers begged for a picture, he politely declined. This night isn't about me, he said, smiling at Emily. But my sister couldn't meet his eyes. Later, when the crowd thinned and the last guests began to leave, I found Grandpa sitting alone on the terrace, the city lights reflecting off his glasses. He was holding the gold box again, his thumb tracing the ribbon like it carried memories. I sat beside him quietly. Grandpa, I said softly, why didn't you ever tell us about the foundation, Mr. Donovan? All of it. He chuckled under his breath. Would it have changed anything, Sophia? Your father stopped listening to me years ago. He was too busy chasing mirrors, trying to look like a man of value instead of being one. I frowned, guilt washing over me. He's wrong about you. You've done more good than he ever has. Grandpa raised his hand gently. Don't speak against him. He's my son and pride is a heavy chain, Sophia. Some men spend their lives dragging it until they fall. He reached into the box and handed it to me. Inside was an old black and white photo. 2 young men standing in front of a half-built house. One of them was Grandpa, the other unmistakably a younger Michael Donovan. Both smiling, covered in dust. We started building homes for veterans when we were your age, he said. Your father was still in college then. I offered him a chance to help, but he said he didn't want to get dirty, so I built without him. My throat tightened and he never knew. Grandpa shook his head. He never asked. But it doesn't matter. A man doesn't need an audience to do what's right. The soft jazz from inside floated through the open doors. I could see Dad standing alone at the bar, drinking untouched, his reflection warped in the glass. He thinks wealth makes him powerful, Grandpa murmured. But kindness builds an empire that never falls. I wanted to tell him how proud I was, how grateful. But before I could, he stood and patted my hand. Don't pity him, Sophia. Life will teach him in its own time. As he walked away into the night, the city lights shimmered against his silhouette. I stayed there for a long time, holding that old photograph, realizing the truth Grandpa had hidden all along. He wasn't just the man my father dismissed. He was the legacy my father would spend his whole life trying, and failing to live up to. 2 days after the wedding, I was still replaying that night in my head, the silence after Dad's outburst, the way Grandpa stood with quiet dignity, and the moment everything shifted when Mr. Donovan called him partner. I thought maybe Dad would apologize, Instead, he came storming into my apartment like a thunderstorm that had been waiting to break. "You let him humiliate me," he shouted, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I stared at him, stunned. "Humiliate you, Dad? You yelled at him in front of hundreds of people, have another radio. You don't understand." He snapped. "He's been manipulating everyone for years, pretending to be humble while stabbing me in the back." I stood up, trembling with anger. "You call that humility manipulation? He didn't even defend himself, Dad. He let you tear him apart and still he forgave you." He laughed bitterly. "Forgive me." He's been plotting that moment for decades. He wanted to embarrass me in front of Donovan, in front of everyone that matters in Charleston. "He didn't want to embarrass you," I shouted back. "He wanted to celebrate his granddaughter's wedding, and you turned it into a war zone." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You always take his side. Ever since you were little, you've looked at him like he's some saint. You think because he builds a few houses for veterans, he's better than me. I built this family's name, Sophia. Me and you destroyed it that night," I said quietly. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. He turned away, his shoulders rising and falling with each breath. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "You think I don't know how people look at me now, like I'm the villain, like I'm the ungrateful son. But I worked my whole life to escape that man's shadow. Every success I had, people still whispered Henry's boy." His words sank into me. Beneath the pride, I heard the pain. "Dad," I said softly, "you weren't supposed to escape his shadow. You were supposed to walk in it until you could make your own." He shook his head, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles turned white. "You sound just like him. Maybe that's not such a bad thing." It's Dipian." For the first time, he looked small, not in stature, but in spirit. The proud, commanding man I'd known all my life looked lost. Like a boy who'd spent years running from a truth he couldn't face. He turned toward the door. "I can't talk about this anymore. You never could," I whispered. The door slammed, and the silence that followed was worse than shouting. That evening, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, a calm voice said, "Miss Parker, this is the Donovan Foundation. Mr. Henry Parker requested your presence at the Veterans Housing Gala this evening. He said you're his guest of honor." My heart leapt. "Of course," I said without hesitation. The gala was held in the same hotel ballroom where my sister's wedding had been, but it felt like another world. Instead of chandeliers and champagne toasts, there were service banners, photos of veterans, and volunteers wearing matching pins that read, "Building Hope." When Grandpa entered, the crowd rose to their feet in applause. Mr. Donovan took the stage, smiling proudly. "Tonight," he said into the microphone, "we honor Henry Parker, a man who taught us that true legacy isn't measured in wealth but in kindness. Because of him, over 200 families have homes tonight." The applause was thunderous. I spotted Dad in the back, standing still, his eyes glassy. Then Grandpa took the microphone. His voice was soft but steady. "I've made many mistakes in life," he began, "but none greater than letting pride divide my family. I raised my son to build but not to forget. And I failed to remind him that the tallest towers mean nothing if their foundations are cracked. I mean, it's now." He paused, his eyes finding Dad in the crowd. "Family isn't about pride, it's about love. And love, my friends, is the only thing that lasts." There was no applause this time, only silence thick with emotion. Dad blinked rapidly, jaw trembling. Then slowly he began to clap. The sound echoed in the hall, hesitant at first, then stronger as others joined. I felt tears sting my eyes. Grandpa smiled faintly and stepped down from the stage, walking straight to Dad. "You taught me how to stand, son," he said quietly. "Now it's your turn to remember why." Dad's face crumpled. He reached out, gripping Grandpa's shoulder. No words, just a raw, trembling silence between them. I realized then that sometimes the hardest battles aren't won with revenge or justice, but with forgiveness that burns before it heals. That night, under the soft light of the ballroom, the Parker family's pride finally broke. And in its place, something far stronger began to grow. The night of the gala felt like a storm that had finally passed. I could still see the image burning in my mind. Dad and Grandpa standing face to face. The unspoken years between them melting into something fragile but real. When the music started again, it wasn't loud or grand. It was quiet like the sound of forgiveness. Later, as guests began to leave, I found them on the terrace, the same spot where Grandpa had stood alone at the wedding, humiliated and silent. This time they stood together. Dad spoke first. "Dad, I was wrong," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I spent half my life trying to prove I was better than you, and all I proved was that I didn't know you at all." Grandpa smiled faintly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "We all forget what really matters sometimes," he said. "The important thing is remembering before it's too late." They embraced awkwardly at first, then tighter, like neither of them wanted to let go. I felt something loosen inside me, a knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. After a moment, Grandpa turned to me, pulling a folded envelope from his coat pocket. "Sophia," he said, "I want you to have this." Inside were documents, half of his shares in the Veterans Restoration Fund. My heart nearly stopped. "Grandpa, I can't accept this. It's yours." He shook his head. "You have your father's drive, but your mother's heart. That's the balance our family needs. One of you builds, the other keeps it human." Tears welled in my eyes. "I don't deserve this." "Then earn it," he said with a wink. Dad looked between us, eyes red but softer than I'd ever seen. "He's right," he murmured. "You'll carry both of us forward." For the first time, we all laughed together. Not forced, not polite, but genuine. As we left the gala, Grandpa slipped his arm through mine, his steps slower now but steady. "You know, Sophia," he said, "people spend their lives trying to build empires, but the only ones that last are made of love." I smiled through the tears. "You already built yours, Grandpa." He chuckled softly. "Then promise me you'll keep expanding it." That night, as I watched him and my father walk ahead of me into the warm Charleston air, I realized something simple yet profound. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It rebuilds what pride once tore apart. And in that fragile peace between father and son, I saw the foundation of something new, a legacy not of wealth or power, but of love rediscovered. A month later, Charleston woke to gray skies and soft rain. Grandpa Henry passed peacefully in his sleep. The man who had been quiet in life left in silence. 2. No drama, no headlines, just peace. The funeral was held at Street Augustine Church, filled to the doors. Veterans in crisp uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with businessmen, local families, and friends whose lives Grandpa had touched in ways we were only now beginning to understand. Mr. Donovan spoke first, his voice echoing gently under the high ceilings. "Henry Parker never sought recognition," he said. "He built homes, not monuments, but in doing so, he built something far greater than hope." Dad sat beside me, his hands trembling. I'd never seen him cry before, but as Donovan's words faded, tears rolled silently down his face. I reached over and took his hand. He squeezed it, whispering, "He built everything I wanted to, but without losing himself." After the service, we stood before Grandpa's casket as the rain tapped softly against the windows. Dad cleared his throat. "I want to finish what he started," he said, "for him and for us." And he did. Together, we reopened the Henry Parker Foundation, expanding its mission to help not only veterans, but also low-income families across South Carolina. Every new house we built carried a plaque with Grandpa's favorite saying engraved beneath the foundation stone: "We rise by lifting others." When the first new housing project opened, Mr. Donovan attended, standing proudly beside Dad and me. Cameras flashed, but I barely noticed. My eyes were on the sunlight glinting off the bronze plaque. Dad turned to me quietly. "You know," he said, "your grandfather would have been proud of you." I smiled. "No, Dad. He'd be proud of us." He nodded, tears glistening again, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from peace. That evening, we went home to Grandpa's old house. It smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, just as it always had. On his desk sat a sealed envelope addressed to me. Inside, in his neat handwriting, were the words, "Sophia, remember, legacy isn't what we leave behind, but who we lift along the way. Keep building. Love, Grandpa." I pressed the letter to my heart. The world outside was quiet, the air warm with the scent of rain and magnolia. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in the shadow of my family's past. I was standing in its light. And as the sun broke through the clouds that evening, I whispered, "You were right, Grandpa. Love really is the only foundation that never cracks."